a French widow who revolutionized the sparkling landscape of the champagne business, and that too in the 18th century when women had almost zero rights. We're all in. Welcome back to a new episode of Her Story, Unforgettable Women. In today's video, we'll step into the life of the iconic business mogul, Madame Clicquot. Her ingenious business strategy made Veuve Clicquot one of the highest-selling champagnes in the world. Let's splash right in to find out how Madame Clicquot worked her magic. Though the world knows her as the Grande Dame of Champagne, her real name is arbe-Nicole Ponsardin. Madame was born into a wealthy family on December 16, 1777. Her father was Baron Ponsardin, a well-established textile manufacturer and politician. So you could say that Clicquot had a thing for business from the very start. She was married to François Clicquot when she was only 21. Unfortunately, these two didn't stay together for very long, with François dying only 6 years later. He left behind Madame, a widow at 27, and his daughter Clementine, an orphan at 6. Keep in mind that Madame was living during a very conservative time. Women lived in the shadows of their husbands and completely depended on them for survival. So the death of her husband was seen as a devastating blow to her life. But Madame was not one to back down easily when life gave her the boot. She made the best of her circumstances and took over her husband's company, which focused on wool trading, banking, and champagne production. Clicquot had done rather well with the business. Thanks to his work experience in Switzerland, François was able to take company sales from 8,000 bottles a year in 1796 to an impressive 60,000 in 1804. However, after Madame's takeover, the company switched to producing champagne completely. You need to understand that Madame Clicquot took over the business during a time when women across the world had next to no rights. They couldn't vote, take a university course, or even open a bank account. Now, how Clicquot managed to become a leading entrepreneur in a male-dominated industry is anyone's guess. By taking over her husband's company at the age of 27, Madame Clicquot managed to send ripples throughout the champagne industry. In fact, she was able to convince her father-in-law, who ran a wine business of his own, to invest in her business. Within a year, she had poured 80,000 francs, which was a serious sum of money for that time. Any other man would have told Madame she's crazy, but her father-in-law was one of the first people who saw the genius in her. She also struck up a partnership with Alexandre Fourneau, who was an expert at assemblage. Unfortunately, even with a master of the craft and endless resources at her disposal, her first years were disastrous. Sales went down to a disappointing 10,000 bottles a year. But Madame was not one to give up easily. According to Anne-Sophie Stock, U.S. Vice President at Chandon, Moet & Chandon and Veuve Clicquot, Madame was fearless in her pursuit. She risked her own inheritance and seized every opportunity that came her way by the neck. She wasn't just focused on making money. No, she had a vision for improving the quality of the champagne. She was dedicated to her craft, and nothing brought her more joy than figuring out ways to make better wine. And it was exactly this motivation that led her to produce the first vintage wine in 1810. And she didn't stop there. No, sir. Madame was only getting started. In 1816, she wowed everyone by inventing what she called the riddling table. For those of you who don't know, riddling tables are constructed by boring holes in 2 boards. This allows the champagne makers to place their bottles at a 45-degree angle, allowing the sediment and the yeast to be concentrated at the mouth of the bottle. Madame Clicquot revolutionized the manufacturing process for champagne everywhere. Her method allows sediment to be removed efficiently, leaving behind a crystal-clear liquid. Before Clicquot came along, champagne manufacturers had to deal with the issue of second fermentation that would leave sediment in the wine, ultimately leading to a cloudy liquid. Surprisingly, Madame's method is used to date by champagne companies across the world. And that's not all. Clicquot is also credited with making the very first rosé champagne. She sourced red vines from her own vineyards to produce the champagne. Before Madame stepped in, companies were in the practice of mixing champagne with elderberries, which is nothing like the rosé wine you get to sip today. Madame took a different route and introduced her own technique. She mixed her red wine with white wine, resulting in an exquisite rosé wine that was nothing like her competitors. That said, Madame wasn't simply an ingenious inventor when it came to champagne making. She was also a savvy businesswoman. Despite the many obstacles before her, Clicquot was able to smuggle out wine to French and Russian armies during the Napoleon Wars. Remember, this is when Napoleon's continental blockade had brought international trade to a halt. But Madame managed to carve out a path for herself, showing everyone in the industry how it's done. She also used the same wit to deal with the Russian Tsar placing a ban on French bottled wine during the summer of 1812. She worked around the restrictions by packaging her products in coffee barrels. It did leave her cellars with a surplus of 60,000 bottles, but she was able to transport her products on board a Dutch ship, shipping 11,000 bottles to Königsberg without papers. This way, she became the first woman to conquer the Russian market. What's amazing is that her merchandise didn't take long to sell out in the region, forcing her to send in another shipment of 12,780 bottles. To put it simply, business was booming. And guess who her biggest customer was? Tsar Alexander, the former emperor of Russia. In fact, he loved Clicquot champagne so much that it was the only wine he would drink. Madame's success in the industry comes as a shock to many, but it can be boiled down to some basic principles that she followed dearly. In a letter to her granddaughter, Clicquot spoke about acting with audacity, which is exactly what put her at the top. It's why she was able to make champagne into the sparkling joy we know and love today. A lot of Madame's success can also be attributed to the fact that she loved her work. So much so that when fraudsters swarmed the market with fake wine after the defeat of Napoleon, Clicquot made it her personal mission to take each of them to court. Madame kept working until her dying breath. She passed away in July 1866, with her company selling 750,000 bottles a year. Safe to say, she died happy with the success of her company. All in all, no one's doing it like the Veuve Clicquot these days, and it's all thanks to one person, Madame Clicquot. Her innovations like the riddling table and rosé champagne remain integral today. Her letters are stored in the company's archives, serving as a guide for generations. And more importantly, her work has been an inspiration for hundreds of women who came after, not just in the champagne industry, but entrepreneurs all across. So the next time you sip an exquisite bottle of Veuve Clicquot, know exactly who you should be thanking. Thank you for watching. If you like this video, please like, share, and subscribe for more exciting HerStory content just like this.